My next guest says he didn't see it coming. He had a successful life, marriage, and career, and then 7 of the greatest challenges any of us could ever face that none of us expect popped up and changed his life forever. Welcome back to the show, Carey Nieuwhof.
It's great to be back. Good to see you again, Maggie.
I just was telling you, this book, Didn't See It Coming, came at the perfect time in my walk, in my life. This, I think, is probably the most candid I've seen you, Carey. Am I speaking correctly?
No, that's right. It's my most personal book that I've written, of the 4 that I've written. And really, it's not really an autobiography at all, but I've looked back at 2 decades of leadership for me. And then I have a heart for other people, a heart for other leaders. And as I look around, I'm like, oh my goodness, these 7 things, and there's more, but 7 made it into the book. These are the things that kind of so many people experience, but nobody really expects.
And I don't think it's just leaders. I think we all struggle through a lot of these things, no matter where you are in your life.
Well, I said to my publisher and my agent, hey, I have a church leader book I want to write. And then they got a hold of the idea in some of the early chapters, and they said, oh no, this isn't a leadership book, it's a people book. And then we thought it was a Christian book, and then we kind of realized, oh my goodness, this goes back to really, it's just a people issue. Whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, obviously, I have a bias. I think Jesus is the answer. But we hope that Christians and non-Christians alike will sort of dive into the book and look at the issues that I talk about.
So why sit down and pen this?
I was perplexed by the question of why do so many people start out so optimistically, so joyfully in life, and yet end up blindsided, almost roadkill at the side of the road. And even if you're not out, you're down. And what are these things? And so there's obvious things like, if you have an affair or steal money or engage in criminal activity, those are big ones. And they're real and they happen to people. But there are much more subtle things, things like cynicism or the emptiness of success or moral compromise that doesn't look like you're going to jail or the CRA or the IRS is chasing you. But it's real nonetheless that I think end up owning a lot of real estate in the average life. And it happens so, what's the word? It's just, it happens so surprisingly.
Yeah.
Like it sneaks up on you and you go, okay, how did I get here?
Yeah.
And that's what the book is about. How did the optimist become a cynic?
Yeah.
How come I got everything on my list, but I feel so empty? And why am I grateful, but I don't feel full? And when I looked at my own life and I looked at the lives of people I care about, these issues seem to show up again and again.
Yeah, because you can check off, I go to church, I believe in Jesus, I read my Bible every day. But there are these things that sneak up, like, as you said, cynicism. So let's list the 7 of the greatest challenges. Cynicism, compromise, disconnection, irrelevance, pride, ouch.
That's
burnout, emptiness. And so you tell how in your early years of ministry, cynicism creeped in because you gave everything to this family that was desperately in need, and they turned back not grateful but just wanting more. And that was the creep of cynicism.
Yeah, so I'm an optimist by nature, totally an optimist. And it wasn't law that really took the optimism out of me, it was ministry. So, and I mean, it happened in ministry. Ministry didn't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I started at some very, very small churches north of Toronto. We started to grow almost right away. One of the first families to come in, to make a long story short, was not well-to-do. They were struggling financially, and I thought, great, we get to be the church. So I went and visited them, spent a lot of time with them. We didn't have a lot of money, but we bought them grocery cards and gift cards and gas cards, and I think one winter month we paid their heat bill or helped them do that. And they came with all kinds of emotional problems, but I'm like, hey, we're the church, let's make a difference. So fast forward a few years, the church isn't a handful of people, it's now hundreds of people, and we're at this event. It's like a potluck. And in the middle of the potluck lunch, the guy stands up, grabs his wife's hand, gathers up his nieces and nephews, grandkids, and announces, we're leaving the church, you don't care about us anymore. Storms out the door, and I chase him into the parking lot, just like I'm heartbroken, I'm crestfallen. And as he's getting into the car, I said to him, Roger, I'll call him Roger. I'm like, Roger, what's going on? And he said, you don't care about us anymore. It's not like the old days. And I said, with all due respect, I said, over these last 4 or 5 years, I don't think I've visited anyone more than I've visited you. I don't think we've invested more money in any family than yours? Like, I don't understand. And he said, you just don't care. He got in the car, he slammed the door, and then he drove off. And there's no happy ending to the story, you know? And something in my heart died that day.
Yeah.
There was something inside me that was so I was hurt. And the next time, because our church hasn't stopped growing, we're still growing. But in that season, the next time a couple walked in the door and they reminded me of Roger and Mary, I'm like, oh, I know how this ends. And that's what cynicism does. It projects past hurt onto present and future relationships. And I found this optimist had grown into being a cynic in ministry.
I love this quote in your book. Cynics never change the world. They tell you what's wrong with it. Ouch.
Yeah.
Expound on that.
Well, cynicism, I think, roots itself in knowledge. And that should be no surprise. Solomon actually traces it out for us in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, where he says, the greater my wisdom, the greater my sorrow, the greater my knowledge, the greater my grief. And there's, the problem wasn't that I didn't know that people can hurt you. The problem was that I did know. And most of us, if you were with us before the break, it's not one Roger or Mary that does it. It's 4 or 6 or 20. And you're like, that's it. I'm done with people. And so the key with the cynic is if you're going to stay cynical, Maggie, you end up in a place where you're just like, oh, I know how this ends. Oh, you want to do something new? Let me tell you what's wrong with that. Right? You become that person. And you know everything that's wrong with the world, and you could have played the football game a lot better than the coach and the players who are on the field, even though you're eating Doritos and you haven't worked out in like a month. But you're smarter than everybody and you know more, and that's a terrible way to live. And what happens with cynicism is you lose hope. And by the time I was at the end of my 30s, pushing 40, I had gone from like 95% optimist to 5% optimist and 95% cynic. And a lot of people, I think they don't know how to get out. So to make a long story short, you can get out of cynicism. And I think the antidote to cynicism ultimately is the gospel. Jesus, met hate and with love. He took death and turned it into resurrection. And I think that's sort of the message. But that can almost say, great, okay, so the gospel is the antidote. That's like saying Jesus is the answer to everything, which he is, but what's more helpful? So I've developed this little hack over the last decade that's really helped me: curiosity. I've noticed that the cynical are never curious and the curious are never cynical. And I do a lot of what you do in my life. I do a lot of question asking. And, you can just be like, oh, all right, well, tell me another thing about your book, blah, blah. Or you can really be curious. And so I've discovered that the more curious I am and the more open I am to the hope and the message of the gospel, the less cynical I become. So once a cynic, not always a cynic.
Take us to, you said the hope is the gospel, but you went through a dark time.
I did.
The summer of 2006, was it? Where you were at the pinnacle of success. You were at North Point Church for a pastor. That's pretty good. You're at North Point Church, Andy Stanley's church. I love it.
Sitting in the front row.
Right? You're speaking there. You're a keynote speaker, and you come back home and you just burn out.
I did. I'd had a decade of leadership and we'd seen some tremendous growth in our church. Not what we've seen since, but it was the biggest church I was ever a part of. And I had a bad formula that more people equals more hours. And more hours, because I'm a Christian, equals more faithfulness, right? How do you say no? I didn't know how to say no. And there were some emotional issues that God was working on, just some emotional intelligence, some, the ancients called it sanctification, that I was working through with counselors and people. So there were a bunch of things, including just physical and emotional exhaustion that sort of combined that led me to a burnout. And it's so weird because I was at the top of the world. We're the fastest growing church in our denomination. We were one of the top churches in our denomination. I just spoken to 2,500 leaders, dream assignment at North Point. Leaders gathered from around the world, and people said I knocked it out of the park. I get back on the plane from Atlanta, land in Toronto. It's like I fell off a cliff. And that summer was the most difficult in my life. It was heartbreaking and really confusing. Because I always thought, well, the rules don't apply to me. I'm not going to burn out. People told me I was going to burn out, and I'm like, no. But the rules never apply to you until they do. And then you realize, wait, I have limits. So it was a really dark summer.
And then you got to the point where you actually thought of taking your life.
I did, yeah.
Driving into a bridge, you thought.
You know, honestly, Maggie, looking back on that, it seems surreal.
Yeah.
It feels like that was not me, but it was me. And it's hard to talk about even now, but I imagine there's some people watching this or accessing this, and maybe, you know, they feel like the only way out is out. Like the only way to stop the pain is to end things. And that's where I got, because the pain was so deep. Just, I was exhausted. I had not grieved my losses. God was doing some stuff in me, but it was really, really painful. I had to look in the mirror for the first time in my life, because all of a sudden my life wasn't your fault and your fault and your fault and your fault. It was my fault and my responsibility, and that's just awful. And by the grace of God, I didn't own weapons, you know, and I remember, because, you know, my thought was, I'm just going to drive my car really fast, unclip my seatbelt, and drive into a cement bridge, which is perverse. And then one day I'm driving home, pull off the highway, and all of a sudden I have this clear moment, a rare clear moment. And I just remember having this thought that was like, Carey, there's nothing wrong with you. This is all in your head. You're going home to a wife who loves you, 2 boys who adore you, a church that has your back, friends who care about you, a God who believes in you and loves you. And that didn't solve everything overnight, but it was the beginning of the turnaround. And it took me about a year to get back to the point, like even my friends, because this is how burnout hides itself sometimes. Like, you had to be pretty close to me to know what I was going through. From the outside, I had a lot of muscle memory. I could preach a pretty killer sermon. I could be really nice to you in public, but on the inside, I was dying. And I think a lot of people live that way. So it took me about a year to get back to 80% of usual, but then I realized I can't go back to normal because normal got me burned out.
Right.
So I had to find a new normal. And I've been living in that new normal for over 13 years now, and it's much better.
Oh, we could talk forever, Carey. I have
Yeah.
a million more questions. Our time is way past done. But thank you so much
You're welcome.
for being here today. Again, the name of the book is Didn't See It Coming, Overcoming the 7 Greatest Challenges That No One Expects and Everyone Experiences. Hey, maybe you're going through a really hard time right now, and maybe you're facing burnout. Maybe you've even thought of taking your life. Our prayer partners are amazing listeners. They are not trained counselors, but they can direct you to a trained counselor. But they would love to pray with you, encourage you, remind you that God loves you, that He is there, that He is present with you right now, even if you can't feel Him at this moment. The number's at the bottom of your screen, 1-866-273-4444, or email us, prayer@crossroads.ca. Stay with us. We'll be right back.